Welcome back. This week we're covering Chapter 7, that's Economic Anthropology. And I wanted to do a short video for you on reciprocity and kind of a quick introduction to gifts. So, reciprocity, or in other words, why do we give and receive? So the book gives the definition that reciprocity is the give and take that builds and confirms relationships. And that's important because reciprocity isn't just an economic idea. It's about how human beings interact with one another, how we form relationships. The idea itself is simply that exchanges must be even or equivalent in some way. And it underlies most non-market exchanges, including things like barter and gifting. It allows for the circulation of things and services without money being present, and therefore it's a form of distribution. But the most important thing I want you to remember throughout this presentation, throughout the chapter, is that reciprocity is actually about relations. Now, in 1970, the anthropologist Marshall Sahlins wrote a book called Stone Age Economics, and in it he develops a typology for reciprocity. I'll go into more detail about each of these three in a minute, but they are balanced, negative, and generalized. And before we sort of go on, it's also important to remember that reciprocity can also be either direct, in other words, the exchange is passing between two people. I give you something, you give me something. But it can also be indirect. I give you something, you give somebody else another thing, and that person gives me something. So that's indirect. Now, balanced reciprocity is, according to the book, a form of reciprocity in which the giver expects a fair return at some time later. I actually have a little quibble with that sometime later thing, because in fact, actually, the sometime later doesn't have to be very long. This is primarily present in barter exchanges, so the direct exchange of one good or service for another. And as you can see from the video here, A gives something to B, B gives something back to A. Very simple, okay? Generally, balanced reciprocity doesn't create long-lasting relationships the way that other forms of reciprocity might. But it does create a relationship, at least for the term of the debt. Negative reciprocity is what happens when A gives to B, but B does not give back. The book defines it as a form of reciprocity in which the giver attempts to get something for nothing, to haggle his or her way into a favorable personal position or outcome. Regardless of that, what happens when a receiver doesn't give back? Or if they do give back, but they give something of lesser value? Or if they take something from somebody else against their will? All of those are examples of negative reciprocity. It also forges a relationship, although it's a negative one, right? When you don't repay your debts, you still owe the person you're indebted to, right? And that means that person might have leverage over you. They might demand even more in return than they expected originally because of the injury. In the case of theft, that's a very personal kind of negative reciprocity, right? It does create a relationship between the thief and the person who was their victim. When that thief is unknown, it's especially distressing because how will that debt get paid? So negative reciprocity covers debt in its widest sense. And that includes debt we think of on a day-to-day basis, like credit cards, okay? You are essentially making a promise But until you pay that back, it's a negative reciprocity. That's why they're going to ask for extra in return. Finally, generalized reciprocity. This is probably the most powerful one in terms of forming relationships. Welsh and Vivanco call it a form of reciprocity in which gifts are given freely without the expectation of return. I should tag on there, no expectation of immediate return. Obviously, family takes care of each other, generally, ideally. Real families are different. But parents are expected to take care of their children. And when the parents get older, children are expected to take care of their parents to some degree as well. Treating a friend for a coffee, right? If you go out and your friend doesn't have any money, you buy them a coffee, you expect they will do the same thing for you at some point. You're not going to call in the favor, you just do it for them because you know they'll do it for you. These kinds of reciprocal relationship exchanges cause people to form relationships, oftentimes very close ones. There are some communities in Malaysia, we'll talk about this a little bit when we talk about kinship, but where feeding someone over time can make them a part of your family. And along with that then comes all the obligations of being part of a family. So generalized reciprocity forms probably the strongest relationships between people involved in reciprocal exchange. Now there's a special subset of reciprocity called gifts. Gifts are more than just the nice things you get at birthdays and holidays, okay? Giving and receiving forms part of every culture on earth, okay? In every culture, there are circumstances under which you are obliged to give gifts and under which you are obliged to accept those gifts. So gifts represent a major organizing principle of economic behavior in many societies. But why is that? Let's think for a minute about what makes a gift different in terms of the kind of reciprocity it is. Oftentimes, gifts require delayed reciprocity. Delayed reciprocity is a form of reciprocity that features a long lag time between receiving a gift and paying it back. According to Jacques Derrida, it is, in fact, required that time passes in order for something to be a gift. For the gift to be a gift, the receiver must not give a gift in return to the giver, not immediately. And it is time between the giving and the return that actually marks a gift as a gift. Time creates the gift by essentially erasing the acknowledgement that the exchange is reciprocal. It allows us to treat the gift as selfless. Even though we all know if you get a present for somebody every year at Christmas, but they never get you anything, that has an effect. Charity. Charity is a particular kind of giving that presents an interesting question. Is there really such thing as free lunch? Can there be an act of giving that is truly selfless and without any compensation or return? This is an argument within anthropology to this day. A gift given as a selfless act, we could ask, well, on the surface it looks like they're not getting anything in return, but in fact, actually, could they perhaps be getting prestige? Do people think differently of them because of their gift? Are they doing it for the gratitude they receive from the receiver? What about anonymous donors? People who don't reveal their identity? Well, could they be getting a good feeling? Are they doing it? Will they receive divine favor for doing that? These are ways that, some anthropologists feel that, no matter what kind of reciprocal exchange you do, no matter what kind of gift exchange it is, there is always a reciprocal exchange coming back. But that also might be splitting hairs too much as well. Might be stretching things too far. So that, though, brings up the issue of anonymity. There are a number of kinds of gifts that we either give or receive anonymously. Do those create relations? Can an anonymous gift create a relation? Um, Gifts from anonymous donors. You can't return the gift to that person. And therefore, what often happens is people feel a sense of obligation to pay it forward to someone else. So it does create future relationships. Gifts to anonymous recipients, on the other hand, things like donating tissues like blood or eggs, are oftentimes framed in terms of a gift to the state or to society as a whole or to a segment of society. The imagined recipient of the gift is not an individual, but a collective of individuals. So the gift isn't given to Barbara. It's given to, say, accident victims or women who can't conceive their own children. And in that, oftentimes the person giving describes actually a kind of bond being formed or strengthened uh, with that imagined collective. So it's possible to create relations not just between individuals, but between society and the individual through this as well. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about obligations. I mentioned in the beginning that there is an obligation to give and an obligation to receive. So let's talk about that a little bit. Unlike market exchanges, you gifts make and strengthen relations. What happens if I turn down a market exchange? If you want to sell me something, what happens if I go, nah, I don't want it, or that's not a good deal? Probably nothing. You go on your way, you try and sell it to somebody else. On the other hand, if you try to give me a gift and I turn it down, what I am essentially saying is I'm turning down a relationship. Now, the degree to which I am obliged to receive that gift is directly proportional to the closeness of that relationship as it already exists. But in any case, it is essentially a rejection of the relationship. Um, and if you accept the gift but refuse to return it, you're also signaling that you don't value that relationship. Therefore, you are both obliged to receive a gift and to return it. It's these obligations that actually make social relations circulate. We'll talk more about that when we talk about kinship as well. So that's all for today. Here's some of the references I made in the talk. I hope you are all staying safe, and until next time, good luck.